Welcome to the National Council of Churches Impact Week 2024. And what a week it's already been. We've had a session on the work of state and regional councils of churches on the importance of voting in this year's election. We've also had a session on artificial intelligence and its intersection with matters of faith. Further, we've had a session on the unfinished work of reparations. And now, tomorrow, we will have a session on plans for the Freedom Summer Campaign. And today, we are looking at international issues, specifically conflicts in Armenia, Haiti, and Sudan. We do so because these, among others, are conflicts that receive little attention in the media, in our local communities here in the US, and in the halls of Congress. I'm Tony Kyriopoulos, and the Associate General Secretary here at the NCC. Certainly, the world is full of conflicts. We continue to lament the situation in Ukraine, which is still at war after the unprovoked and unjust Russian invasion nearly 2.5 years ago. No one thought this conflict would last as long as it has. No one saw the equivocation in some circles of the US on the matter of continued support for Ukraine. From the first day of this conflict, the NCC has condemned the invasion and ongoing onslaught, which is aimed to be no less than a genocidal erasure of the distinctive national identity of the Ukrainian people. We call for an end to this war, and we pray for peace. We also lament the situation in Gaza, where massive casualties among the citizen population have occurred. From the outset of this conflict on October 7th of last year, we've condemned the horrific attack by Hamas on Israel, the killing of some 1,200 Israeli citizens on that day, and the taking of nearly 250 Israeli hostages, more than 100 of whom are still being held captive. And we indeed pray for their safe return. At the same time, we've also condemned the killing of about 37,000 Palestinian civilians, a number that leads us to consider the Israeli military response as extreme at best and perhaps as genocidal at worst, if not in intent, then in its near total disregard for human life. We have called for a ceasefire, and again, we pray for peace. Even as these and other conflicts and crises around the world, coupled with environmental degradation and food insecurity, inflict pain and suffering on countless millions. We wish today to lift up 3 conflicts that aren't readily and continually on our radar screens. First, we will consider the current situation in Armenia. The NCC has, truth be told, been outspoken in its condemnation of the actions of Azerbaijan against the people of Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh. We have issued statements and advocated on behalf of the Armenian community. But as you will hear today from our first speaker, Simon Magakian, who is a scholar, researcher, and community organizer working in multiple organizational settings, and the founder of a research firm appropriately called Heritage Intel, the situation in the region remains unresolved, indeed dire. Next, we will hear from our second speaker, Charlotte Lucien, who is a scholar and activist associated with numerous institutes and organizations working on issues related to Haiti, as well as a Haitian storyteller, poet, and visual artist, and the founder and director of the Haitian Artists Assembly of Massachusetts on the current situation in Haiti. It is true that we hear reports on the evening news now and then about the violence that has a stranglehold on the Haitian people. But I'm not sure we fully understand the situation, its political instability and the ensuing violence, or how we got here, not only in the recent past, but also in the broad sweep of Haitian history. We hope that this discussion will enhance our understanding. Finally, we will hear from our third speaker, Pauline Mushina, a church leader, ecumenist, and scholar working with several institutions on issues critical to Africa, and who is also the founder of the Future African Leaders Project, which supports African youth in meeting education and health challenges, about the strife that characterizes today's Sudan. Many years ago, the NCC played a leadership role in the global fight to end the genocide in Sudanese region of Darfur. In fact, I served on the board of the Save Darfur Coalition and as chair of its successor organization, United to End Genocide. Since that time, however, with ups and downs of the political developments in the region, Sudan has largely dropped from the world's radar screen. Our conversation will illustrate for us the devastating reality that is Sudan today. Simon, if I can now turn to you. The displacement last year of more than 100,000 Armenians from Artsakh, indeed the entire Armenian community there, was heart-wrenching. Today we hear about the cultural decimation of the Christian historical sites in the region. Some have characterized these actions as a continuation of the genocide of more than 100 years ago. What is the current situation, and how have Armenians worldwide responded to this continued onslaught?
Thank you, Tony, and National Council of Churches for the opportunity to highlight three important yet underreported crises from around the world. And thank you so much for the question and all the work that NCC has done for Armenians and other persecuted religious groups and everyone across the world. As many of the viewers will recall, Armenia was in the top news in late September, early October, when Azerbaijan, as you referenced, completely removed the entire indigenous Armenian population from Artsakh, or as it's more internationally known, Nagorno-Karabakh, that disputed territory that became part of Soviet Azerbaijan due to decisions in part made by Joseph Stalin, and where the Armenian population strived for autonomy despite all odds. And once it saw its dwindling numbers, it decided to separate for survival, yet ended up finding itself in a war that Armenians won in the early 90s, but that Azerbaijan decided to relaunch in 2020, and then late last year, as a result of which no Armenians are left in Nagorno-Karabakh. Just to help the leaders and everyone as part of this conversation to picture the importance of Nagorno-Karabakh for Armenians. This is where the world's first Armenian school was opened in year 405 AD. And this was just right after the creation of the Armenian alphabet, a century after Armenia had adopted Christianity as an official religion. So this is an integral part of the Armenian homeland, and one of the few sections of Armenian populated areas that outside the modern Republic of Armenia, but that is no longer the case. As you referenced, over 100,000 refugees from the region, pretty much the entire population have left. So another up to 50,000 actually had left earlier. So the entire population of 150,000 indigenous Christians of this region are now refugees. Thankfully, most of them are in Armenia, where they're physically and culturally relatively safer, but it's still a very distinct community with its own Armenian dialect, with its own cultural traditions that have been shaped through events of several millennia. And it's a region that has tried to coexist with the political realities for so long, including some of my own ancestors had Islamic names despite being Christian. And that was a way to just accommodate the realities of the time. So now all of that population is no longer in their indigenous homeland. So the refugee population in Armenia is obviously struggling with humanitarian issues, with housing, with work, etc. I mean, there's temporary housing for everyone. I'm not aware of anyone being physically homeless or outside on the streets, but they don't have decent living conditions. Many of them don't. And in fact, one of the things that I personally was involved with another um, um, activists and scholars in the Armenian community. Earlier this year, we tried to help a couple of refugee journalists to have decent housing situations so that they could continue doing their incredible work. I mean, this is how dire the situation is, where the most important voices in that community even need support. And unfortunately, the Armenian diaspora and the Armenian government don't have the resources to adequately support this refugee population. The United States itself, I think, has devoted an estimated $15 million of aid, which is a fraction of the estimated $2 billion that's necessary for proper accommodation of these people. Now, assuming there was somehow a way to resolve this humanitarian situation, I mean, the cultural legacy, the history that's being lost, and also all of the properties that were left behind. Some people just fled with their documents and nothing else. So assuming all of the humanitarian issues in Armenia can be resolved, there's still other pressing issues. One is cultural heritage, as you briefly discussed, and I'll talk about that, which is really what my research is about. But there's also 24 Armenian political hostages and POWs, and maybe even many more that we don't know about in Azerbaijan. And there's also the ongoing threat of invasion of sovereign Armenia by Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, and possibly enabled by Russia, that remains an ongoing concern. So I want to talk more about these issues, and at the end, I know when we talked earlier, you also wanted to find out how NCC can do more despite all the vocal support you've given to this community, and I'll try to cover that as well. So we have the refugee population in Armenia since late September, early October, facing those problems of housing and accommodations and work. The heritage that is left behind is of utmost concern, because Azerbaijan is one of the few countries that have taken anxieties associated with the material past in ethno-territorial conflicts that, frankly, are normal in a sense of conflict. But Azerbaijan has taken these anxieties to extraordinary measures of complete erasure. For example, between 1997 and 2006, in another historically Armenian territory called Nakhichevan, the entire Armenian Christian landscape was eradicated from the face of the earth. This is the covert heritage crime that my research has exposed. So in 2019, I co-published a major investigation that showed this entire heritage had been destroyed, comprising of an estimated inventory of 89 churches, about 5,840 intricately carved crossstones that were spread across several cemeteries, but primarily concentrated at Julfa, the world's largest medieval Armenian cemetery. And then across those cemeteries, also an estimated 22,000 horizontal tombstones. So all of that has been destroyed. This has been shown through a variety of methodology, including confirmed with satellites. But the most stunning confirmation of this destruction comes from Azerbaijan itself. In denying the destruction and dismissing my work, Azerbaijan says no Armenian monuments were destroyed in Nakhichevan because those monuments never existed to begin with. So this is the level of genocidal erasure, complete flattening that has taken place of Armenian heritage in another region. And we see a version of that, although not to the same systemic and systematic level of the second, but we see a version of that in Azerbaijan. Recently there was report of the destruction of the early 19th century St. John the Baptist Church in the city of Shushi. And this is one of the two Armenian churches in that city that's now under Azerbaijani control, both of which had their domes demolished, sort of in a symbolic act of beheading. And now one of those churches has been completely flattened. And what's most bizarre about this flattening is that after damaging this church, Azerbaijan was pretend renovating it for months. International delegations would be taken to the church and shown it as, sort of Azerbaijan's token of tolerance, although they never acknowledged that it was an Armenian church. They even had a local propaganda group, forced religious minority leaders that have to go and and support the regime to go pray in there, accommodated by the religious leader of Azerbaijan, the Sheikh al-Islam. So there are pictures of this church that Azerbaijan was renovating after having damaged it itself, and now it's completely flattened. There was actually more news of destruction yesterday from another historical site. Entire cemeteries and villages have been wiped out. And this is really painful for Armenians, because a lot of Eastern Christians don't see houses of worship and cemeteries only as places that are of gathering, right? Those are also places of memory, places of sacredness. They're holy sites that are incredibly important for the people who have lived in those areas. And once you take their heritage away and eliminate its traces, it's basically telling them there is no hope for your survival or your return to those lands. And in fact, the Azerbaijani autocrat Ilham Aliyev has used wording that projects his intent and that says no trace of Armenians will be left on those lands. And this is very, very stunning. Of course, there's hateful rhetoric on both sides in every ethno-territorial conflict, but we have not seen any other conflict in modern history where a government will eradicate an entire historical landscape to the last stone. We have seen major destructions in conflicts in the Balkans. We've seen ISIS target different heritage. We see China target Uyghur or Uyghur mosques and shrines, but we have not seen this level of destruction. So that's very, very, very concerning. So that's about the cultural heritage. In terms of the political hostages that are still being kept, so there's POWs that were captured in the 2020 war and in further aggressions by Azerbaijan, and there were actually agreements to mutually return all POWs, which Armenia did, but Azerbaijan actually kept several hundred of them, and but only acknowledges having a few dozen. Many have been returned as a coercive method against Armenia, but still there's 24, and 8 of them are actually political hostages. The former democratically elected leaders of Nagorno-Karabakh that were captured after the attack in September of last year. And these people are very prominent individuals. Among them is Ruben Vartanian, who is a prominent philanthropist. And he actually renovated the largest mosque in Shushi, in the very same city that Azerbaijan later captured and destroyed the Armenian church that I talked about. So the irony of arresting some of the people who have actually, despite being vocal defenders of the Armenian community, but also people who have tried to find some mechanism of coexistence, it's really shocking, but still unsurprising for those of us who are familiar with the way that Azerbaijan acts. And finally, I also want to emphasize the ongoing threats against the sovereign Republic of Armenia by Azerbaijan. So despite eliminating this region of its Armenian population, now Azerbaijan has further territorial claims against the Republic of Armenia, is asking for extraterritorial land bridge with Nakhichevan, that other region that I talked about, that has been the focus of my own research. It's forcing nonstop concessions from Armenia, including demanding, this should really be upsetting to everyone, particularly Christians, including demanding that Armenia remove Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark from Armenia's coat of arms, because Mount Ararat, as many of us know, has been part of Turkey since the Armenian genocide a century ago, yet it has also stayed on the Armenian coat of arms through the years, including in the Soviet era. So now Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, is actually even trying to force Armenia to remove the most sacred of Armenian symbols from Armenia's official imagery. So it's a very, very concerning time, and there's the looming threat of invasion of Armenia. Azerbaijan is emboldened by a variety of factors, not least because of the war in Ukraine that has allowed Azerbaijan to deepen its relations with both Russia and the West, particularly as a launderer of fossil fuels. So it will take Russia's gas and reroute it to Europe. So it's actually making money on both sides. And one opportunity that exists for NCC and other stakeholders to be a part of a solution is the upcoming COP29, which is the climate summit hosted by the UN. This year, surprisingly, it will be hosted by Azerbaijan. And it's really ironic because Azerbaijan started the final cleansing, as it's calls its president described the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh recently. So the final cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh started with a pretend environmental blockade by Azerbaijan, one of the largest polluters in the world, as an oil-rich country, and now it's actually hosting the this upcoming event. So NCC and others who have leverage over elected officials and other stakeholders that will be present at COP29 should be really calling on all participants, if they're not willing to boycott COP29, but at least use the opportunity to stand up for human rights of not only Armenians, but everyone in Azerbaijan. And that can take a variety of forms. Perhaps, a ribbon can be worn in support of the Armenian POWs, and if there are opportunities for statements or distribution of information to talk about the importance of preserving and protecting churches in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I'll end it there, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But I am really thankful for all the work that NCC has done in support of Armenians and all persecuted people around the world. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Simon. I hear in that list of hurts and harm that going on with the Armenian people, opportunities for the church, not only in humanitarian areas, and like you say, in the international realm with regard to rights, human rights, and others. What I found particularly distressing, I think, in your comments was the notion of the erasure of memory, and that really was quite moving. Perhaps we can return to that later, depending on our time. Charlotte, if I could turn now to you. We hear about the situation in Haiti, but certainly not enough. You are a keen observer of Haiti who can peer into its complex past and draw out its deepest longings. In this conversation today, what do you want us most to know?
Thank you again to the National Council of Church for inviting me. Thank you, Tony, and I'm happy to be here with Simon and Pauline as well. The situation in Haiti is so complex that there are multiple things or priorities that we need to keep in mind. And let me also say that whenever we talk about Haiti, there's always this narrative that is ingrained in the psyche of most viewers or listeners about Haiti being a poor country in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti, a land of political instability, violence, etc. And when I hear or when I understand how people are looking at Haiti, I tend to raise what I call the concept of historical urgency. It's a rather novel concept in public history that calls for ways to redress or to address current situations that are the outcomes of clear historical misdeeds. So what people have been hearing most recently is about gang violence, about, again, political instability, the assassination of a president. And more recently, people in the US have seen those painful images of border patrol horsemen chasing Haitian migrants who just crossed the border from Mexico into Texas. So when we hear this, again, the comments, and we look at these images, we also don't always have a sense of what I call the historical context. And it's painful to think about it because people may know or may not know that Haiti is the first Black republic in the world, the second republic in the America after the US. And we can, what else can say that in the US, there are maybe 4 states that have towns called Haiti. This is back in the 19th century. So I'm pointing out those historical facts to establish the huge gap between what has been in the past, what Haiti represented, and what we are seeing now. So I can share some maybe hard numbers for people to understand what we are saying now. So if we go back quickly to 14 years ago, 2010, people may remember, or some, about this terrible earthquake that hit Haiti in 2010, killing more than 250,000 people. That was going to decimate the already fragile infrastructure of the Haitis and of the institutions in Haiti, whether it's the government or the civil society. But beside the earthquake, we've also heard about other either flooding or other earthquake that took place in 2016 and 2021. All of this, again, is decimating the economy, but it is also exacerbating what we know to be this terrible political situation that we've seen. So after the earthquake, as I mentioned, a lot of those infrastructures, health, education, bridges, roads, electricity plants, have been destroyed. And as a result of the fragility of the state, as a result of the lack of either government or institution, we saw some gangs emerge that was at times either supported, exploited, or even generated either by certain governments or either by certain economic elites that have some interest into using those gangs for their own interest. So in 2023, for example, we are just looking at some reports about human rights. We have more than 5,000 people who were kidnapped by gangs. We have, along of those, again, kidnappings, along of those assassinations, we also witnessed or heard reports of rapes, torture, the burning of houses or entire neighborhoods. Some of those gangs even succeeded in shutting down some gas distribution plants, succeeded into shutting down the Haitian airport recently between March, April, and May, leading also to the shutting down of schools and hospitals in Haiti. The International Organization for Migration also report that more than 94,000 people had to flee the Haitian capital over the past 3 months to relocate from, again, Port-au-Prince, the capital, and get into the provinces or into rural areas. So we don't even know about the number of people who now had also fled either to the Dominican Republic, the border country, either to Bahamas, to the Florida coast, or some of them, or many of them, either to Chile or to Brazil in South America, with the hope of crossing some 11 states between Brazil to get to the coast of the US via Mexico. And for them to do that, they have to cross what they call the Darien Gap, which is one of the most dangerous area between South America and the US. So that means that aside from all those people who are being either kidnapped or murdered in Haiti, as a result of those particular events, you have now people who are migrating into situations where they also die or they end up here in the US to be victims of all kind of human rights abuses or all kind of exploitation. So this is the kind of picture that we are looking at now. It's clearly, again, doom and gloom. But I only looked at it as, again, one side of the story because we are other elements that we can look at. So Haiti being a fragile state, some people clearly label it as a failed state. This is the language that I've seen from a few scholars in international relations. So as a result, there have been a number of so-called humanitarian interventions or so-called I'm going to call them occupations of Haiti between 1994 and more recently up to 2017. Now, between 2017 and now, what have we seen, aside from the gang violence that I mentioned? And when I say gangs violence, we are also talking about those gangs now literally taking over close to 70% of Haiti's capital, meaning either in what used to be or what are known as either slums or what used to be well-established neighborhoods of Haiti. Those gangs now have full control pushing people to leave. So the government is cornered into doing business in some particular region, supposedly protected by national police that is totally inefficient, A, because of manpower capacity, B, because of a lack of resources. We are talking about the national police force of about 7,000, close to 7,000 units of policemen or policewomen for a population of close to 11 million people. So in October of 2023, the UN Security Council approved a UN mission of support to the national police. This is, again, to help the national police fight the gangs. This is, again, this was also to help protect some of the infrastructure, so the traveling, so the education and the schooling and the delivery of natural gas can happen. However, although it was authorized in 2023, because it was supposed to be led by Kenyan forces, and this particular request was blocked by the court in Kenya, there hasn't been any, if you will, official ability or capacity to dispatch those troops. Again, it is viewed as a UN mission led by Kenya, so there would have been a few other countries from Benin, from the Caribbean community, that were going to be part of this particular, again, contingent, military contingent as well, to, as I say, support the national police. So far, that's not the case. The more recent development over the past 3 months, there have been efforts facilitated by the Caribbean community, CARICOM, and of course with the backing of the US and the so-called core group, which is a group of other countries, Canada, France, the US, Venezuela, Brazil. They actually have a structure where their ambassadors meet and then bring what they call support to Haiti. This is, by the way, a structure that is heavily contested by many Haitians who view this type of structure, this type of core group, as doing more intervention and at times more bad or more bringing more actually aggravating the situation in Haiti than doing anything good. However, just to bring it back to what I'm saying here, there was an effort facilitated by the CARICOM, the Caribbean community, that brought together many parties on the political scenes in Haiti. Some of those groups have been on the opposite side of the Haitian agenda per se. However, they were able to come together as a group of 9 members, 7 with the ability to actually vote. And then they came up with a prime minister who will be tasked of ensuring between now and February of 2026 a certain climate that will be conducive to elections, so that by February 2026, there will be a new president in Haiti. So that's where we are now in terms of pictures. We clearly can discuss the kind of responses that need to be brought to resolve this, and I'm happy to do that later, either at the international level, at the regional level, like CARICOM or the US, or internally what can be done. We can also discuss what the church as an institution, with its capacity, its prestige, and its international or local representation, what it can do to help alleviate the situation in Haiti, to help alleviate, again, what I call a historical urgency. And that's how I define Haiti. So again, happy to bring or to discuss more some of those topics. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Charlot. I appreciate hearing about your idea of historical urgency. I think that really helps us to understand the situation at least a little better than we have as observers from the U.S. We'll be interested to hear more about the church's possible response, certainly not only from the National Council of Churches, but across the board, from not only Christian churches, but also other faith communities worldwide. But for now, let's turn to Pauline and talk about Sudan. One can probably say that we hear even less today about Sudan than we do about Armenia and Haiti. And yet it has been a focal point for instability in Africa for quite some time. How has this situation largely escaped the world's attention? And what can you tell us, Pauline, about the extent of the suffering there, which according to some reports amounts to the world's largest displacement crisis, with some 8 million people now internally and externally displaced? Rani?
Sorry. I'm really glad to be with you this evening. I'm talking from Kenya, and to have the opportunity to talk about what's happening in Sudan is a good thing for me, because we have been struggling to get Sudan in the media, and we are failing miserably. But not only in the media, but also in the minds of people, whether it's in the US or Europe or elsewhere, where they wield the power of what's happening globally. But just to give you a little bit of background, or rather to talk to you about what is happening in Sudan right now. Since April 2023, over 15,000 people have died in Sudan, and millions have been internally displaced. Actually, according to the UN statistics, over 9 million people are currently displaced in Sudan. And those who are maimed, those who are suffering, those who have lost family members, the suffering is too much, and the trauma is just, what we can't even describe at this point. Just a report came out yesterday, and it says, in Darfur Zamzam refugee camp, a child dies every 2 hours because of malnutrition, hunger, malaria, and dengue. That is unacceptable. As Tony has said, Sudan now faces the world's largest displacement crisis. Over 9 million have been forced to flee their homes, with approximately 6.6 million internally displaced, and another 1.8 million seeking refuge in neighboring countries such as Chad, Ethiopia, Egypt, and South Sudan. Over 1/3 of Sudan's population faces acute hunger. The UN has warned that hundreds of thousands of people, including new mothers and children, could succumb to malnutrition in the coming months. It's already happening. We are not now talking about coming months, because populations in Sudan are now starving, and children are dying from malnutrition. In Khartoum and other regions, essential services and infrastructures have collapsed. Hospitals and clinics have shut down, while thousands of schools remain closed, depriving over 19 million children of their right to education. Half of Sudan's population, approximately 25 million people, urgently need humanitarian aid or humanitarian assistance. But humanitarian organizations' efforts are hampered by challenges in delivering aid to conflict zones and a severe lack of funding. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimate that they need 2.7 billion this year alone to provide essential services for people who are suffering in Sudan. Yet the funds raised thus far have fallen significantly short of this goal, leaving millions of lives at stake or in the balance. Little attention, if any, is given to Sudan by the media and also the political world. So today I was pleasantly surprised to know that the UN Security Council passed a resolution to end the siege in Darfur. And I will talk about that a little bit further down. But, all this suffering in Sudan, who is causing it? Why is it that people are dying? Why is it that people are displaced? And is it a civil war, or what kind of war is happening? The conflict is rooted in a complex web of competing forces vying for the control of Sudan amid long-standing political unrest and ethnic tensions. So it did not start last year. The SAF, or Sudan Armed Forces, led by General Abdel Fattah Bahar, are fighting against RSF, or Rapid Support Forces, who are led by General Mohamed Dagalo. The SAF ousted Bashir, but they were helped by the Rapid Support Forces. And then they've been discussing how that Rapid Support Forces could be integrated into government. And in April last year, they failed to agree. And therefore, a war broke out. This struggle for power is exacerbated by external powers. And we want you to understand that it is not only these two generals fighting for power, but there are other external forces, external companies, external armies that are actually keeping this war going. These nations who are supplying arms to Sudan, who are actually even training some of the Sudan military, are doing it in order to have access to Sudan's rich natural resources, including gold, oil, and farmland. They include United Arab Emirates, Iran, Russia, especially through the Wagner Group, Egypt, and others. So the war in Sudan is not a civil war per se. It is the military of Sudan and the Rapid Support Forces, supported by external forces, all fighting to gain control so that they can control the natural resources in Sudan. I also want to let you know that concerns are growing that genocide is once again taking place. I think, Tony, you said that the National Council of Churches worked on to stop the genocide in 2003. And we thought that it would never happen again in our lifetime. Unfortunately, currently it is happening. Each passing day brings more lives lost, injuries, and accounts of rape as a weapon of war and sexual violence against women and girls and boys. On December 6, 2023, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made a damning determination declaring the involvement of the RSF and allied militias in crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. This determination also implicated both the RSF and SAF in acts of war and crimes. Last year, 2023, Amnesty International documented a litany of atrocity, including indiscriminate killings of civilians, rape, targeting women and girls, and deliberate assault on vital institutions such as hospitals and places of worship. And also, this year, Human Rights Watch also produced another even more damning report, which actually spoke of how the RSF is doing consistent ethnic cleansing. And in some instances, people have been buried alive because they belong to Masalit ethnic group and have been killed by the RSF. Also in May this year, a UN Security Council briefing was held on women, peace and security, conflict-related sexual violence. Speaker after speaker underscored the devastating impact of the war on women and girls. In regions like Darfur, rape has tragically become a weapon of choice, while cases of ethnic cleansing continue to unfold. Nimat Ahmadi, president of Darfur Women Action Group, and also one of our American Friends Service partner, implored Security Council members to recognize the urgency of protecting civilians and delivering vital humanitarian aid to avert further disasters. At that time, Nimat warned the UN Security Council that El Fisher, which was the only remaining city that was providing food for the people in Darfur, was at danger of being destroyed and people being killed. And at that point, nobody listened to her. But today, the UN passed a resolution, 14 members and Russia abstained, and the resolution was brought about by the United Kingdom. And it is calling for a ceasefire in Sudan and also an end to the siege that is now currently surrounding El Fisher. They have destroyed the only hospital that was remaining that could offer people services, health services. Also, in places like Zamzam camp, they are not spared. Like even if you're in a refugee camp, you are not safe because these militias are getting into those refugee camps and destroying people's lives, either maiming, raping women, or killing people. Some children watching their parents being killed, or they are killed at the same time with their parents. So you may say, you know, with all this pain and suffering, what can the faith community do, or what can we who are based in the US do to stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Sudan? So it is very clear that urgent action is needed to end the conflict, save lives, provide crucial humanitarian aid, and foster sustainable peace in Sudan. So these are the things that we are proposing. So in addition to supporting their diplomatic endeavors, the US must champion an inclusive peace process addressing the root causes of violence, engaging diverse stakeholders, not only the warring factors, but also include women, youth, civil society groups, and religious leaders. This is so essential, especially if we want lasting peace in Sudan. We urge the US to collaborate closely with allies to enforce the arms embargo in Darfur and expand it to the rest of Sudan in order to protect civilians and deliver humanitarian assistance. We also believe that holding accountable those violating the embargo, such as UAE and others, and also making sure that arms are not getting into Sudan is critical in stopping and protecting the lives of people we are losing. So we must keep urging members of Congress to recognize Sudan's atrocities as genocide. And there was a resolution that was introduced in Congress by Senator Risch, Senator Kadin, and Senator Booker. Unfortunately, that resolution did not advance. So we are still calling for it to advance. And as I said before, the Security Council now has said that the ceasefire must stop. They are calling for the end of the siege. And even yesterday, the International Criminal Court said they believe that genocide is taking place. So as people of faith, the first thing we do when we hear how much suffering and death and whatever is happening to our brothers and sisters, we pray. But we are appealing to the faith community to add something in their prayers. And that is to work with the Biden administration and other policymakers in the United States to continue calling for a ceasefire, to hold countries like UAE, which are US allies, accountable for spreading arms or for selling arms or providing arms in order to have access to gold and farmland in Sudan. We are appealing to you to talk to your member of Congress and ask them to support Representative Sarah Jacobs' bill to stop UAE supplying weapons to RSF. We have written language, or we have guidelines how you can do that so that your prayers are accompanied by action, because that is what faith is. We must stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Pauline. It is so distressing to hear that, your report. I certainly appreciate what you said about what churches can do, but I want to ask you, as a faith leader, you're known as a religious leader. How do you maintain hope, you know, in this kind of distressing situation?
There is nothing else we can do other than keep hope. It doesn't mean that there are times I am not completely frustrated, But I also believe that God cares for God's people, and remember that things like apartheid in South Africa did not end in a day, but we did not give up. We kept on calling for it. The civil rights movement in the US, we kept going even when it looked like it would never happen. The colonialism, slavery, all the evils of this world that have happened have had an end, even though some of it still exists in different manners. But as a person of faith, I pray a lot, but I also urge my fellow faith believers or believers that we cannot just pray, but we also have to lend our voices, whether it is to our governments or even to the media, so that the media can start covering this issue. They are not covering it. So do we do op-eds as religious leaders, which we have done, but we are asking more religious leaders to write op-eds. And just yesterday, we did a letter of appeal, which we are sending to President Biden, signed by religious leaders. And if you don't have a copy, I'll be sending it to you. And please, if you can share it with other religious leaders to sign on, to let President Biden know UAE should stop supplying arms. We should increase our humanitarian aid to people of Sudan. And we should definitely extend the embargo, not just for Darfur, but for the rest of Darfur. And we have to say also, we have been saying enough is enough. And then genocide are happening in our, on our watch. Look at Gaza, look at DRC, look at Sudan, look at what is happening in the world. So pray and act. Thank you.
Thank you. What a witness. What a
witness. Thank you.
And also the witness of all of you and your testimony and the facts that you have raised for us today, both Simon, Charlotte, as well as Pauline. It's remarkable. Let's take a few minutes just to perhaps talk amongst ourselves. There's so much suffering in the world, and much of it overlaps, the kinds of situations. Is there anything that you could share with one another about your situations that might give a little hope to the others? Or have you heard anything today that might give hope? Simon?
I'm happy to share one example. I mean, it shows that there is hope, although I'm not sure how it impacts the lives of people in a manner that would be meaningful to them. But a lot of authoritarian states, which is what I study, involved in human rights violations, they take a specific pride in getting away with those violations. I mentioned in my presentation how Azerbaijan, would take delegations to St. John the Baptist Church in Shushi for propaganda, photo taking before the destruction. And that is not something that has happened just once or twice for many, many years. Azerbaijan and other authoritarian regimes engaged in religious rights violations, have been actually promoting themselves as religiously tolerant and trying to polish their image internationally, take propaganda tours to their country, etc., to earn credit within their own population, but also internationally for to build capital for violations like against Armenia, so that they can get away with that. But despite a lot of the efforts that have happened, we've seen some progress. So last year, the U.S. State Department designated Azerbaijan on their special watch list for religious rights violations, and the USERF, which is the congressional watchdog, earlier this year placed Azerbaijan on the worst list, along with Nigeria, although we know the U.S. State Department keeps ignoring that recommendation for a country of particular concern, which is the highest recommendation. So it's very slow. It's very frustrating, especially if you're on the ground, like my colleagues and I are on working on these issues, and you don't see the immediate impact. But human rights violations and the instabilities, they may not be in the spotlight right away, or solutions will not come at the pace that we want them. But eventually, the violators, I know we're speaking about different contexts, but the violators, may get away for years and years. But I think their hard work and civil society engagements, including from actors like the NCC, do produce results in the long term. And so I wanted to share that example. And I also want to thank again my fellow panelists and the host for this incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you. I was going to relate to what Pauline was saying earlier about the fact that in places like the US, there are forces that have interest into the production, distribution, and sales of weapons in places where either conflict exists or in places where they instigate the conflicts in order to ensure the distribution and the sales of those weapons. So the idea of reaching out to local networks in the US through the churches or other advocacy groups in order to identify specific ally that could influence US policies as far as controlling how ammunitions and weapons leave the US and get into places like Sudan, Haiti, and elsewhere. So there is room here for a concerted effort to identify, again, those allies who can try to impact those policies and jointly, work to make this happen across the board. Because this whole, again, idea that in a place like Haiti that doesn't produce weapons, that you have gangs who are receiving on a weekly basis heavy-duty weapons to terrorize the population, this is totally absurd.
Oh, wow. I think you took my words what's out of my mouth, because I was going to say that who is benefiting from all these wars? And there is the military complex, industrial complex that is benefiting from this. But the faith community has been complicit. We don't challenge the military industrial complex the way we should, because some of these companies are in our states, and actually our economies rely on them. So analyzing what is our complicity causing the world is very important as people of faith. Secondly, I want to say that we also have to acknowledge that some of the faith community leaders have been implicated, like in Armenia, in supporting conflict and also in hate. So as we are challenging the political leaders and policy members, we also have to challenge ourselves as the faith community. What are we teaching in our congregations? Whom are we saying we support, even when we are not supposed to be supporting political leaders? Some of our communities, faith communities, do support some political leaders based on their understanding of what that political leader is going to help them. And in so doing, sometimes become complicit on tolerating violence that's happening to our people. I've looked at what is happening with the Gaza, genocide, and how some of the faith leaders are the ones who are talking about Israel being a chosen nation, rather than saying all human beings are created in the image of God, and therefore genocide should not happen anywhere in the world. The issue of racism, and it's not just racism on skin colors, it is also the ethnic rivalry. It is also economic injustice based on geography, and also based on people's color and based on people's class, which the churches, the mosques, the temples, the synagogues have not effectively addressed. You know, we tend to want to, you know, like not address some of those issues in our midst, but then in the wider society, they get worse. I am worried, my brother Charlotte, of what is happening with the Kenyan government agreeing with President Biden to bring police from Kenya to Haiti. These police are causing havoc here in Kenya. They are not properly trained to avoid being corrupted by the gangs that you have, because corruption is a daily activity for police here in Kenya. So when you take them to a place like Haiti, what are you trying to say? And then the last thing I would say, I work for an organization, and I also believe this very strongly, that we cannot have sustainable peace through military interventions. So we have to have a non-violent approach. We need to build dialogues in our communities, and then we need to bring people to the negotiating table. We need to change people's mindset. In countries where people's mindsets have been corrupted, we need to change the narrative so that we can actually have peace in our world. Thank you.
Well, like all clearly speaking prophets, you've urged us to look within as the religious communities, to look at ourselves, to turn inward and look at our own sins and complicity and see how we can change things and to work for the good. Thank you. We're coming near to a time where we'll have to close. Is there any other comment that any of you would like to make before we do close?
Look out for the letter that we are requesting you to sign that is going to President Biden. Please sign, and we are going to deliver them before the end of this month. So we would love to have your signature on it, please. Wherever you are, religious leaders, please sign that letter to call for the end of the war in Sudan, and to hold people accountable that are making it happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to say that the National Council of Church can connect with other existing church congregations or federations. There are a number of them, either like Caribbean Convention of the Baptist Church in the Caribbean. We have a federation of the Overseas Haitian Evangelical Churches, which is kind of diaspora-wide. We have Association of Haitian Evangelical Pastors here in New England, where I am. So I think connecting with some of those other regional organizations or federations will be very beneficial, because you will benefit from their expertise, from the language, capacity, and from their connections in Haiti. That's one. I was also going to say that the diaspora, it could be true for Armenia, it could be true for Sudan and for Haiti, has been, or what we call those transnational networks in the diaspora, are powerful forces that can contribute to instill change in the country when you have maybe leaders who are corrupted, or when you have gangs who are not actually abiding to anything. But diaspora resources and forces can contribute. And finally, when I was mentioning earlier what I call the Haiti as an historical urgency, we are currently looking at the concept of restitution, because quickly, back in 1825, Haiti had to pay what is today the equivalent of $28 billion for France to recognize Haiti's independence so that other countries can engage with Haiti. So this particular payment that was done over between 1825 to 1947 literally undermined and sabotaged Haiti's ability to invest its economy into infrastructure, health, education, and so on and so forth. So currently there is a movement internationally that is supportive of the concept of France paying back what used to be 150 million francs, which is now $28 billion or even more by other estimates. So I'm just looking at the church as a leader to help facilitate mediation and conflict resolution. I'm looking at the diaspora to intervene and contribute to Haiti. And I'm looking at repairing this historical misdeed of 1825 by having friends come to the table and negotiate with Haiti. thanks again for opening doors to discuss those kind of issues.
Thank you, Charles. Simon?
I also want to thank again for all the work that NCC has been doing, and I'm sure that we all here would welcome other opportunities, by member churches to continue raising awareness about some of the most underreported crises around the world. It really means a lot to have spotlight on the situations, because the worst thing that can happen is that even our allies stop caring about the crisis that people around the world are going through. So thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of this program.
Thank you. Well, friends, both those of you who are on screen with me and those who are watching this webinar, our time has come to an end. I wish it weren't so. There's so much more to discuss, and yet we must bring this conversation to a close. Our thanks go to Simon Magakian, Charlotte Lucien, and Pauline Muchina for their insights into these three conflicts in our world today. You have made us smarter and better people for knowing and feeling the pain and suffering of our brothers and sisters in these other contexts. On behalf of the National Council of Churches, I express my appreciation to you, and I pray for you and the people you've advocated for today in this session. The NCC calls this Impact Week. You have indeed helped to make an impact that we further pray will lead to peace. Thank you.
Thank you.